I froze during my shift on that rainy night in Manhattan when I saw my daughter Lily's $8,400 tuition bill. If I couldn't come up with the money, she would be expelled within 24 hours. Just as everything seemed hopeless, I spotted an urgent notice seeking a rare blood type and offering a huge reward. A few hours later, as a night security guard and delivery driver, I found myself lying in one of the most luxurious hospital rooms in the city, my blood flowing through a tube to save a dying female billionaire while her wealthy children stood outside the door looking down on my skin color and social status, unaware that this very man was about to change their fate forever. This is a fictional story written to inspire and uplift. At Memory Stories, we believe the right story at the right moment can change everything. The most expensive private hospital in New York City sat on the Upper East Side like a fortress of glass and steel. What I didn't know at the time was that inside room 1407, surrounded by machines that cost more than most people's houses, Eleanor Harrington was dying. She was 78 years old, with a net worth of $4.2 billion and a real estate empire spanning 3 continents, but right then, none of it mattered. The heart monitor beeped in a steady rhythm, the only sound in a room that smelled of antiseptic and money. Eleanor lay motionless on the hospital bed, her silver hair spread across the silk pillowcase her assistant had brought from home. Her eyes were closed, but beneath those lids her mind drifted through memories she had spent 40 years trying to forget. She was alone, completely, utterly alone. The nurses checked on her every 30 minutes. The doctors reviewed her charts twice a day, but no one sat by her bedside. No one held her hand. No one whispered words of comfort into her ear. That was what for. $2 billion bought you in the end. The best medical care money could provide, and not a single soul who actually cared whether you lived or died. The door swung open and her son Nathan walked in first, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the polished floor. At 45, he had the kind of face that looked handsome in magazine photos but cold in person. His charcoal gray suit probably cost more than a registered nurse made in a month, and he wore it like armor. Behind him came his younger sister Brooke by 3 years. She was dressed in a black designer dress as if she had already picked out her funeral outfit and decided to try it on early. Her perfume entered the room before she did, something French and expensive that clashed with the sterile hospital air. Neither of them looked at their mother's face. Nathan's eyes went straight to the heart monitor, watching the green line spike and fall. Brooke pulled out her phone and checked her reflection in the dark screen, adjusting a strand of hair that had fallen out of place. I later learned that Nathan said the doctor told them it could be any day now, his voice flat and businesslike as if he were discussing quarterly earnings rather than his mother's life. Brooke glanced at the figure on the bed and said she looked terrible, and asked when the last time she had her hair done was. Nathan reminded her they needed to talk about the will. Brooke's eyes sharpened. She was supposed to sign the updated version last week, the one that gave him control of the Asian properties and her the European portfolio, but Nathan told her she never signed it. The current will was the one from 2019, splitting everything 50-50 with a bunch of charitable donations thrown in, 30% of the estate going to various foundations. Brooke's face twisted with something that looked almost like panic, and she said that was over $1 billion going to strangers while they got stuck splitting what was left. Nathan told her to keep her voice down because the nurses could hear everything. They argued in harsh whispers about how they had waited their entire lives for this inheritance. I later learned that right then the heart monitor began to beep faster. Both of them froze, staring at the machine. After a moment, the rhythm stabilized and Eleanor remained unconscious. Nathan let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. The doctors said she needed a blood transfusion. Her type was AB negative, one of the rarest in the world. Less than 1% of the population has it. The hospital supply was depleted, and they had been searching for a compatible donor for 3 days. Neither Nathan nor Brooke was compatible. They were both from their father's side. Different blood type entirely. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. No compatible donor meant no transfusion. No transfusion meant their mother would die, and the current will would go into effect. 30% to charity, but 70% to them. Brooke smoothed down her black dress and allowed herself a small smile. She said that was unfortunate, and they would just have to hope for the best. Nathan mentioned the hospital was putting out an emergency notice offering a $500,000 reward to anyone with AB negative blood who came forward. Brooke laughed, the sound harsh and brittle, and said their mother would hate that, paying $500,000 to some random stranger for their blood. She'd rather die. Nathan looked at his mother's pale face and said quietly that maybe she would. They decided to stay for at least an hour for appearances while Brooke had dinner reservations at Le Bernardin at 7. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor. 2 children sat in vigil beside their dying mother, not out of love or grief, but obligation and greed. On the bed, Eleanor Harrington's chest rose and fell with mechanical precision, her lungs filled by a ventilator that cost $3,000 a day. Her face was peaceful in unconsciousness, but if anyone could have seen into her dreams, they would have found something very different. In her mind, she was standing in a small apartment in a part of the city she hadn't visited in 40 years. The wallpaper was peeling, the carpet was stained, and the radiator made a clanking sound every few minutes. But she was happy there. Happier than she had ever been in any penthouse or mansion, because in that apartment she wasn't alone. There was a man who loved her, and a little boy with bright eyes and a smile that lit up her whole world. But that was a lifetime ago. Another Eleanor entirely. The woman she had been before grief and guilt and billions of dollars had frozen her heart into something unrecognizable. The current Eleanor was dying in a room full of people who wanted her dead. And somewhere across the city, in a rundown apartment in the Bronx, the son she believed had died 40 years ago was about to see a message that would change everything. The heart monitor beeped on. In hospitals and on billboards and across every screen in New York City, an emergency notice flashed. AB negative blood donor needed. Reward $500,000. The race against death had begun. 7 miles away, in a neighborhood where ambulances sometimes refused to come after dark, I was fighting my own battle for survival. My delivery truck was parked outside a warehouse in the South Bronx, and I was hauling boxes through the rain like my life depended on it, because it did. My supervisor yelled at me to pick up the pace because we had 15 more stops before 6. I grabbed another box, felt my back scream in protest, and kept moving. I was 44 years old, working night security from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. and delivery from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. 4 hours of sleep if I was lucky. That was my life now. My coworker Carlos jogged up beside me and asked if I was okay because I looked like death warmed over. I told him I was fine, but he pressed me, saying I almost dropped that TV back on 138th Street and asking when the last time I slept more than 4 hours was. I didn't answer. I just grabbed another box and loaded it into the van. My hands were shaking, that tremor I'd been trying to hide for months. I shoved them in my pockets and leaned against the truck, catching my breath while the rain soaked through my jacket. Carlos lit a cigarette under the warehouse awning and watched me. He said for real, "Ryan, you're going to kill yourself working like this." I told him I couldn't stop. He asked why not. What was so important that I had to run myself into the ground? I closed my eyes and saw her face. Lily, 8 years old, bright eyes and a smile that made everything worth it. My daughter was a genius, and I wasn't just saying that because I was her father. Teachers said it. Test scores proved it. She could solve math problems that made grown adults quit in frustration. I said everything I do is for her. Carlos nodded slowly and flicked ash into a puddle. That school she goes to, right? The fancy one. Hudson Academy, best school in the city for gifted kids. I opened my eyes and stared at the gray sky. She earned her spot there, beat out hundreds of other kids. Most of them had parents who made more money in a month than I made in a year. Carlos asked how I was paying for it. I let out a bitter laugh and said I wasn't. That was the problem. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with wet fingers and saw the notification. An email from Hudson Academy. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. They regretted to inform me that Lily's enrollment was at risk due to 3 months of unpaid tuition totaling $8,400. They insisted on full payment within 24 hours, or Lily would be suspended from classes effective immediately. 24 hours. $8,400. I read it 3 times, standing in the rain, letting the water run down my face. 24 hours to find money that didn't exist. 24 hours before my daughter lost everything I'd been killing myself to give her. Carlos was watching me and asked what was wrong. I told him they were going to kick Lily out. The school said I had 24 hours to pay 3 months of tuition or she was done. He whistled low and said, "Damn, brother, that's rough." I shoved the phone back in my pocket and grabbed another box. I didn't have time to feel sorry for myself. I had 6 more deliveries to make, then I had to pick up Lily, then clock in for my night shift. And somewhere in between I had to figure out how to make $8,000 appear out of thin air. The apartment waiting for us in the Bronx wasn't going to help. 4th floor of a building where the elevator had been broken for 3 months. Kitchen that was really just a counter with a hot plate. 1 bedroom I'd given to Lily while I slept on the fold-out couch. The bills sat on my kitchen counter like a pile of accusations. Electric bill, 3 months behind stamped final notice in angry red letters. Rent 2 months behind, with the landlord threatening eviction. Phone bill about to be cut off. 17 envelopes total, and I could pay maybe 2 of them if I skipped eating for the rest of the month. I loaded the last box and climbed into the driver's seat. My body ached everywhere. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I'd lost 15 pounds in 6 months from skipping meals so Lily could eat, but I couldn't stop. Stopping meant the bills won. Stopping meant Lily went to public school in a neighborhood where smart kids learned to hide how intelligent they were. I'd gone to those schools. I knew what happened there. Lily deserved better. She deserved everything. I finished my route on autopilot, driving through the rain while my mind raced through options that didn't exist. I could beg the school for more time, but the email said time had run out. I could ask for another advance on my paycheck, but I'd already done that twice this year. I could sell something, but I didn't own anything worth selling. My phone buzzed again. A text from Carlos. "Yo, Ryan, you see this? Check Channel 7 News. Some rich lady at that fancy hospital needs blood. They're paying $500,000 for a donor. Not joking, bro. What's your blood type?" I almost ignored it. $500,000, that kind of money didn't exist in my world. But something made me text back. A B negative. Why? Carlos's response came instantly. "Bro, that's the type they need? I'm dead serious. Harrington Memorial Hospital. Get over there now." I pulled the van to the curb and searched it on my phone. The results loaded slowly on my cheap data plan, struggling against the rain. But eventually I saw it. Urgent AB. Negative blood donor needed. Compatible donors will receive $500,000 reward. Contact Harrington Memorial Hospital immediately. I stared at the screen, rain hammering the windshield, wipers beating a steady rhythm. 500,000 for blood. My blood. I was a B negative, had been since my army days when they typed everyone and told me I was special, less than 1% of the population. It had never meant anything before, just a line on my medical records. But now, sitting in my broken-down van with the rain pouring down and my daughter's future slipping away, those 2 letters meant everything. I checked the time. I had to pick up Lily. I drove to the community center on autopilot, my mind spinning with possibilities I was afraid to believe in. When I walked inside, Lily was sitting in the corner bent over her notebook, pencil moving in quick strokes. She looked up and her whole face lit up. "Daddy!" She ran to me and threw her arms around my waist. "Look what I did, Mrs. Patterson gave us algebra problems and I finished first and she let me try the 9th grade worksheet and I got every single one right." I knelt down and hugged her tight, breathing in her strawberry shampoo. This perfect, brilliant girl. "That's amazing, baby. I'm so proud of you." She asked if we could get pizza tonight because we hadn't had pizza in forever. I thought about the $12 in my wallet, the email from her school, the 24 hours ticking away. Sure, baby. We can get pizza. We walked to the van through the rain, Lily holding my hand and chattering about her day. I helped her into the back seat and buckled her in, and that's when I saw it through the windshield. The billboard at the intersection. Massive digital flashing red and white. Urgent AB. Negative blood donor needed. $500,000 reward. Harrington Memorial Hospital. The numbers glowed through the rain like a message from God himself. Daddy! Lily was watching me. Why are you staring at that sign? I climbed into the driver's seat, my hands steady for the first time in months. Change of plans, baby girl. Daddy's got to make a stop at the hospital. She asked if I was sick. No, sweetheart. I pulled into traffic heading toward Manhattan. I'm going to help someone who needs my help, and if I'm lucky, they're going to help us too. I didn't know who needed my blood. I didn't know anything about Eleanor Harrington or her billions or her children waiting for her to die. I didn't know that the woman in that hospital bed was connected to me in ways I couldn't imagine. All I knew was that Lily needed $8,000 by tomorrow, and the universe had just shown me a way to save her. For my daughter, I would drain every drop of blood in my body. The van crossed into Manhattan, leaving the Bronx behind, heading toward a collision with destiny that would change everything. Harrington Memorial Hospital rose out of the Manhattan skyline like a cathedral of glass and steel, its lobby bigger than the entire apartment building where we lived. I stood at the entrance with Lily's hand in mine, both of us dripping rainwater onto the marble floor, looking completely out of place among the wealthy patients and their designer clothes. Daddy, this place is fancy, Lily whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the crystal chandeliers and the fountain in the center of the lobby. I know, baby. Just stay close to me. I approached the reception desk where a woman in an expensive-looking blazer was typing on a computer that probably cost more than my van. She looked up and her eyes traveled from my wet delivery jacket to my worn-out boots. Her smile became noticeably thinner. I said I saw the notice about the blood donor, AB negative. I was here to help. The receptionist's eyebrows shot up. You're AB negative? Yes, ma'am. Have been my whole life. She picked up a phone and spoke quickly into it, her voice suddenly urgent. Within 2 minutes, a team of nurses appeared and ushered Lily and me through a set of double doors, down a hallway that smelled like expensive disinfectant, and into a private examination room. A nurse explained the process while preparing to draw blood for testing. They needed to run compatibility tests first. Blood type was just the beginning. There were other factors that determined whether a donation would work. I nodded. Do what you need to do. I'm here to help. They drew my blood, took my vitals, asked me questions about my medical history. Lily sat in a chair in the corner swinging her legs and working on math problems in her notebook, occasionally looking up to make sure her father was okay. The results would take about 20 minutes, the nurse said. Just wait here. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. 20 minutes. Then I would know if my blood could save this stranger and earn the money that would save Lily's future. Down the hall in a small laboratory, Dr. Nicole Morrison stood surrounded by 3 other doctors. They were all staring at a single piece of paper, the test results from the man who had walked in off the street. Dr. Morrison read the numbers again, then a third time, her face growing more confused with each reading. She murmured that this couldn't be right and told them to run it again. They did. The results came back identical. The 4 doctors looked at each other in silence. Doctor. Morrison's hands were trembling slightly as she held the paper. One of the younger doctors opened his mouth to speak, but she held up a hand to stop him. Not here, she said quietly. Not now. She folded the paper and slipped it into her coat pocket, her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes told a different story. In 30 years of practicing medicine, she had never seen results like these. What exactly was on that paper? What did those test results reveal that made 4 experienced doctors stand in stunned silence? The answer to that question would change everything. But for now, the secret stayed locked in Dr. Morrison's pocket. She walked back to the examination room where I was waiting, her professional mask firmly in place. Good news, Mr. Mitchell. You're compatible. We can proceed with the transfusion immediately. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. That's great. Thank you. They would move me to a private room on the 14th floor. The procedure would take about an hour. Dr. Morrison paused at the door, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Mr. Mitchell, I want you to know that what you're doing today is extraordinary. You're saving a life. I said I was just glad I could help. They moved me upstairs. Lily walked beside me, clutching the old bracelet she always wore on her wrist, the one I had given her when she was 5 and told her it was a keepsake from her grandmother, the woman who had died before Lily was born. The truth was, I didn't know much about my own mother. She had left when I was 4 years old, and my father had never wanted to talk about her. All I had was that bracelet, and a few faded memories of a woman with soft hands and a sad smile. "Daddy, are you scared?" Lily asked as we walked down the long hallway. "No, baby. Giving blood doesn't hurt much. It's like getting a shot but longer." She asked if the sick lady would be okay after. "I hope so, sweetheart. That's why we're here." A nurse helped me onto a bed and began preparing my arm for the transfusion. Through the glass window that separated the 2 rooms, I could see the patient for the first time. She was old, probably late 70s, with silver hair spread across a silk pillowcase. Her face was pale and drawn, tubes running in and out of her body, machines beeping steadily around her. Even in unconsciousness, there was something about her expression that made me pause. She looked fragile, yes, but also deeply sad. The kind of sadness that came from carrying a heavy weight for a very long time. "That's Mrs. Harrington," the nurse said, following my gaze. "Eleanor Harrington." The name meant nothing to me, just another rich person in a city full of them, but I couldn't stop staring at her face. Something about it tugged at a place deep in my chest, a feeling I couldn't name or explain. It was like looking at a photograph from a dream I had forgotten. The door burst open. Nathan Harrington stormed in first, his face twisted with rage. Brooke followed close behind, her heels clicking against the floor like gunshots. "What the hell is going on here?" Nathan demanded, pointing at me. "Who is this man, and why is he in my mother's room?" Dr. Morrison stepped forward, positioning herself between the siblings and me. "Mr. Harrington, this is Ryan Mitchell. He's the compatible donor we've been searching for. He's here to save your mother's life." Nathan looked at me, took in my wet delivery jacket and worn boots, and his lip curled with disgust. "Him? You're going to put his blood in my mother?" Dr. Morrison said he was the only compatible donor they found in 3 days of searching. Without this transfusion, his mother would die. Brooke stepped closer, her expensive perfume filling the room. She said absolutely not. She wouldn't allow it. Find someone else. There was no one else. Then fly someone in from Europe. Search every hospital on the East Coast. She didn't care what it cost. Brooke waved her hand toward me, her voice dripping with contempt. "We are not putting the blood of some poor black delivery driver into our mother's body. Do you understand me? The very idea is disgusting." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had heard hatred like this before. Felt the weight of that particular kind of cruelty. It never got easier, but I had learned to keep my face still, to not give people like this the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. Nathan nodded vigorously. His sister was right. There had to be another option, someone more suitable. Dr. Morrison's expression hardened into something cold and dangerous. She told them both to be very clear. This man was the only person who could save their mother's life right now. If they interfered with this procedure in any way, she would have security remove them from the building, and then she would call the police and file charges for obstruction of emergency medical care. They would be arrested, and it would be on every news channel in the country by morning. Nathan's face turned red. Did she know who they were? Did she have any idea how much money their family had donated to this hospital? Dr. Morrison said she knew exactly who they were. She also knew that their mother was dying while they stood here complaining about the skin color of the man trying to save her. She pointed at the door. "Wait in the hall or leave the building. Those are your only options." The silence stretched for a long moment. Nathan's hands clenched into fists at his sides and Brooke's face twisted with fury. But something in the doctor's eyes made them back down. "This isn't over," Nathan hissed as he grabbed his sister's arm. "When Mother wakes up, she'll hear about this. All of it." They left, slamming the door behind them. Dr. Morrison turned to me, her expression softening. She apologized for that. I kept my voice steady, even though my heart was pounding. "It's not your fault, ma'am. Can we just get started? I want to help the lady." The nurse finished preparing my arm and inserted the needle. I watched as dark red blood began to flow through the tube, traveling across the space between my bed and the room where Eleanor Harrington lay dying. The moment my blood entered her body, something strange happened. In her room, the heart monitor began to change. The rhythm that had been weak and irregular started to strengthen. Each beep came more steadily than the last, the green line on the screen rising and falling with new strength. A nurse called out that her vitals were stabilizing, blood pressure coming up, heart rate normalizing. I closed my eyes and let the exhaustion wash over me. My body was weak from months of overwork and not enough food, but I kept the blood flowing. For Lily. For the money that would save her future. For this sad old woman whose face made me feel something I didn't understand. Out in the hallway, Lily sat on a plastic chair, her legs too short to reach the floor. She was fidgeting with the bracelet on her wrist, the tarnished silver one that her daddy said came from her grandmother. A shadow fell over her. Lily looked up to see the mean-looking woman from before, the one in the black dress who smelled like too much perfume. Brooke was staring down at her with cold eyes. "What are you doing here?" Brooke's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "This is a private floor. Children aren't allowed to just sit around in the hallways." "I'm waiting for my daddy," Lily said, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "He's helping the sick lady." Brooke's eyes dropped to the bracelet on Lily's wrist. For just a moment, something flickered across her face. Her eyes widened slightly and she leaned closer, staring at the old piece of jewelry like she had seen a ghost. But the look vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by that same cold contempt. Brooke snapped at her to get out of here and go wait downstairs in the main lobby where she belonged. This floor was for family only, and she was certainly not family. But my daughter remembered what I always told her. "My daddy told me to wait right here. He said not to move." Brooke didn't care what her daddy said. She waved her hand like she was shooing away a stray animal. "You don't belong here. You don't belong anywhere near this floor or this family. Now get out of my sight before I call security." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she stayed in her chair. She clutched the bracelet tighter against her chest, tears rolling silently down her cheeks, and she waited. Brooke made a sound of disgust and walked away, her heels clicking down the hallway. The transfusion took nearly an hour. By the time the nurse removed the needle from my arm, I felt like I could sleep for a week. My body was already running on fumes before I walked into this hospital, and now I had given away a pint of blood on top of everything else. The nurse said I needed to rest, and they had a recovery room right next door. Stay there for at least 30 minutes before I tried to leave. Doctor's orders. I nodded weakly and asked about my daughter. She was in the hallway. The nurse said she would bring her to me. They moved me to a small room adjacent to Eleanor Harrington's private suite. It was simple compared to hers, just a bed and a chair and a small table, but it was still nicer than any hospital room I had ever been in. The sheets were actually soft and the pillow didn't smell like industrial detergent. Lily came running in a moment later, her eyes red from crying. "Daddy!" She climbed onto the bed and wrapped her arms around me. "That mean lady told me to leave, but I didn't. I stayed right where you told me to." I held her tight, feeling anger rise in my chest. "What mean lady? What did she say to you?" "The one in the black dress? She said I don't belong here and told me to go downstairs." Lily sniffled against my chest. But she remembered what I always told her. "I belong anywhere I choose to stand, baby girl. Don't let anyone tell you different." So she stayed in her chair. "That's right, baby girl." I kissed the top of her head. "You did good. I'm proud of you." We lay there together on the narrow hospital bed, Lily curled against my side. Both of us exhausted from a day that had started with overdue bills and ended in this strange palace of glass and money. Within minutes, Lily's breathing slowed into the rhythm of sleep. I stared at the ceiling, too tired to sleep, but too weak to move. Through the wall, I could hear the steady beeping of Eleanor Harrington's heart monitor, stronger now than it had been before. My blood was keeping her alive. A stranger's blood, a poor man's blood. The blood that her own children had called disgusting. I wondered what kind of woman she was, this billionaire who needed my help. I wondered if she was anything like her children, cold and cruel and obsessed with money, or if she was something different, something softer, hidden beneath all that wealth. It didn't matter, I told myself. I was here for the reward, $500,000, Lily's future. That was all that mattered. A crash from the next room startled me out of my thoughts. I heard a nurse's panicked voice through the thin wall that connected my room to Eleanor's suite. Something had fallen, something heavy, and now there were sounds of objects scattering across the floor. Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry. I'll get that. The nurse was saying, please don't tell anyone. She could lose her job. I gently moved Lily aside, tucking a pillow next to her so she wouldn't notice I was gone, and walked to the doorway that connected the two rooms. The door was slightly open, and I could see the nurse on her hands and knees desperately gathering items that had spilled from a leather bag. Let me help you, I said, stepping into the room. The nurse looked up with relief. Oh, thank you. I was just moving Mrs. Harrington's personal belongings to the cabinet, and the bag slipped. Please help me get everything back before anyone sees. I knelt down and began picking up the scattered items. A silk scarf, a leather wallet, a pair of reading glasses in an expensive case, and then my hand touched something that didn't belong with the rest. A wooden box. It was old and worn. The kind of thing you might find at a flea market or in the back of a grandmother's closet. The wood was dark with age, and the hinges were tarnished brass. It looked completely out of place among the designer items that had spilled from the billionaire's bag. The box had fallen open when it hit the floor, and something white was sticking out of it. I picked it up without thinking, intending to close it and hand it back to the nurse. But then I saw what was inside, and my whole world stopped. A photograph. Black and white, old and faded, the edges worn soft from years of handling. In the photograph, a young woman was smiling at the camera with a joy that seemed to light up the entire frame. She was beautiful, probably in her early 20s, with bright eyes and dark hair that fell past her shoulders. She was white, clearly wealthy even then, wearing a dress that looked expensive even in the old photograph. But she wasn't alone. Standing next to her, his arm wrapped around her waist, was a black man. Tall and broad-shouldered with a smile that I knew better than my own reflection. It was my father, Victor Mitchell, dead for 15 years now, but unmistakable in this photograph. The same strong jaw, the same kind eyes, the same way of standing with his shoulders back and his chin up like he was ready to take on the whole world. My hands began to shake. Sir, are you all right? The nurse's voice came from very far away. I couldn't answer. I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything but stare at this photograph of my dead father standing with a woman who was now lying in a hospital bed 20 feet away, kept alive by my blood. I looked at her face in the photograph, then turned to look at the old woman on the bed. 40 years had changed her, stolen her youth and her color and the brightness in her eyes. But it was the same person, the same woman. My father had known Eleanor Harrington, not just known her. The way they were standing in this photograph, the way they were looking at each other, the way his arm was wrapped around her waist like she was the most precious thing in the world. They had been in love. I reached into the box with trembling fingers and found more photographs. My father and this woman at a park. My father and this woman in front of a small apartment building. My father and this woman holding a baby. A baby. I looked closer at that photograph and my breath stopped in my chest. The baby had dark skin and bright eyes, and the woman was looking down at it with an expression of pure, overwhelming love. There was writing on the back of the photograph. I turned it over and read the words in faded ink. Ryan, 3 months old, my beautiful boy. The box slipped from my fingers and hit the floor again, scattering its contents across the tile. Letters spilled out. dozens of them, all in envelopes that had never been opened, never been sent. Each one was addressed in careful handwriting. To my son, Ryan. For Ryan when he's older, to my darling boy, with all my love. I picked up one of the letters with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. I opened it and began to read. And with every word, my understanding of my entire life crumbled into dust. My dearest Ryan, today is your 10th birthday, and I wonder what kind of boy you've become. Are you tall like your father? Do you have his laugh? I think about you every single day, every single hour. I have never stopped loving you, not for one moment. I know you must hate me for leaving. I hate myself for it too. But I want you to know that I did it for you, for your future, for everything I wanted to give you. I was wrong. I was so wrong, and I am so sorry. Tears were falling down my face now, dropping onto the paper and blurring the old ink. I picked up another letter and another, each one a window into 40 years of grief and regret. This woman had written to me every year, every birthday, every Christmas, letters full of apologies and explanations and desperate aching love. Letters she had never sent, never mailed. Letters that had sat in this wooden box while I grew up believing my mother had abandoned me without a second thought. I looked at the old woman on the hospital bed and I saw her differently now, not a stranger, not a billionaire, not the mother of those cruel people who had tried to throw me out. My mother, the woman who had given birth to me, held me, loved me, and then vanished from my life when I was 4 years old. She was right here. She had been right here all along, living in her tower of glass and money, writing letters to a son she thought she had lost forever. The rage hit me first. 40 years of believing I wasn't good enough, wasn't worth staying for, wasn't worth loving. 40 years of my father's silence, refusing to talk about the woman who had left us. 40 years of growing up poor and struggling and alone while she built an empire and slept in penthouses and raised other children who grew up to be monsters. But underneath the rage, something else was breaking open. Something that had been locked away since I was 4 years old. Since the day I woke up and my mother was gone. I missed her. I had always missed her. And now she was dying in a hospital bed, kept alive by my blood, surrounded by children who didn't love her, holding a box full of letters she had never had the courage to send. I sank to my knees on the cold hospital floor. The letters scattered around me. And I wept for the mother I had lost, for the father who had kept this secret, for the little boy who had spent 40 years believing he wasn't worth staying for, and for the choice I now had to make about what to do with the truth. I sat on the cold hospital floor for a long time, surrounded by letters and photographs, trying to piece together a story that had been hidden from me for 40 years. The words in those letters painted a picture so different from everything I had believed about my mother that I felt like I was reading about a stranger's life. But the answers weren't complete. The letters told me that she loved me, that she never stopped thinking about me, that she was sorry, but they didn't tell me why. Why did she leave? Why did she never come back? Why did she let me grow up believing I had been abandoned? I picked up one of the oldest letters dated 1985 and began to read. And slowly, piece by piece, the truth of what happened in 1980 began to emerge. The year was 1980, and Eleanor Harrington was 23 years old. She wasn't a billionaire then. She wasn't even rich. She was just a young woman who had made a choice that her family would never forgive. A choice that had cost her everything she had ever known. She had fallen in love with Victor Mitchell. They met at a jazz club in Harlem, one of those smoky basement places where the music was good and nobody cared what color your skin was. Eleanor had gone there with friends from college, looking for adventure, looking for something different from the stiff dinner parties and country club dances that her parents insisted she attend. Victor was playing trumpet that night. He wasn't famous, just a local musician trying to make enough money to pay his rent. But when he played, something magical happened. The whole room stopped talking and just listened. Eleanor couldn't take her eyes off him. They talked after the show, and then they talked the next night and the night after that. Within 3 months, they were inseparable. Within 6 months, they were married at a small courthouse in Brooklyn with no family present and only 2 friends as witnesses. When Eleanor's parents found out they disowned her completely, cut her off from the family fortune, removed her from the will, told everyone in their social circle that their daughter had died. A white woman marrying a black man in 1980 was scandal enough, but a Harrington, it was unforgivable. Eleanor didn't care. She had Victor, and that was enough. But love doesn't pay the bills, and idealism doesn't put food on the table. They moved into a tiny apartment in one of the poorest neighborhoods in the Bronx, a place where the heat barely worked, and the walls were so thin you could hear your neighbors arguing at 3 in the morning. Victor picked up whatever work he could find, playing music at night and working construction during the day. Eleanor tried to find jobs, but in 1980, a white woman with a black husband faced closed doors everywhere she turned. When I was born in 1982, their poverty became even more desperate. Now, there were 3 mouths to feed, and the money that barely stretched for 2 was nowhere near enough for 3. Some nights, Eleanor went to bed hungry so that Victor could eat enough to work the next day. Some weeks, they had to choose between paying the electric bill and buying food for the baby. But they were happy. Despite everything, despite the poverty and the struggle and the constant exhaustion, they were happy. They had each other, and they had me. And that was more than enough. Then, the opportunity came. A friend of a friend knew someone who worked at a major corporation in London. They were looking for smart young people with business instincts, people who could learn fast and work hard. The starting salary was more money than Victor and Eleanor made in a year combined. There was just one problem. The company had strict policies about hiring married women, especially women in what they called complicated domestic situations. This was 1984, and the business world was still run by men who believed that a woman's place was in the home. A married woman was seen as a liability, someone who would get pregnant and leave, someone whose loyalty would always be divided between work and family. A woman married to a black man. Even worse. The executives didn't say it directly, but the implication was clear. If Eleanor wanted this job, she would have to pretend she was single. She would have to leave her family behind and build a new identity in Europe, one that didn't include a husband or a child. It was an impossible choice. Leave the people she loved most in the world, or watch them slowly starve to death in that tiny apartment with the broken heater and the empty refrigerator. Eleanor chose to go. She and Victor talked about it for weeks, fighting and crying and holding each other through sleepless nights. In the end, they agreed that it was the only way. She would go to London, work for a few years, send money home every month. Once she had established herself, once she had enough saved up, she would find a way to bring them to her, or she would quit and come home. It was supposed to be temporary, 2 years, maybe 3, just long enough to save enough money to give their family a real future. Eleanor kissed her husband goodbye at the airport. She held her son, just 2 years old, and promised him that Mommy would come back. She promised Victor that she would write every week, call every Sunday, send money on the 1st of every month. And for the first year, she kept every promise. The money arrived like clockwork. The letters came every week, full of love and longing and plans for the future. The phone calls were expensive, but Eleanor didn't care. Hearing Victor's voice, hearing little Ryan babbling in the background was worth every penny. Then the accident happened. Victor and I were driving home from a doctor's appointment when a drunk driver ran a red light and slammed into our car. Victor's injuries were severe: broken ribs and a shattered leg and internal bleeding that required emergency surgery. I was luckier, just cuts and bruises, but I was only 3 years old, and terrified and crying for my mother. They spent weeks in the hospital. The bills piled up faster than Victor could count them. When they finally got out, they discovered that the landlord had rented their apartment to someone else. All their belongings were on the street, soaked by rain and picked over by strangers. With no home and no money, and a body that could barely walk, Victor had no choice but to move. A cousin in Philadelphia offered them a room, and Victor took it. He tried to write to Eleanor, tried to let her know where they had gone, but the letters never reached her. The address she had was for an apartment that no longer existed in a building that had been condemned and torn down 6 months later. For 2 years, they were lost to each other. Eleanor sent letters that came back marked "Return to Sender." She sent money that was never collected. She called phone numbers that had been disconnected. She hired a private investigator, but he found nothing. It was as if Victor and I had vanished from the face of the earth. Finally, in 1987, Eleanor flew back to New York. She had made enough money by then to take time off work, and she was determined to find her family no matter what it took. She went straight to the old neighborhood, to the building where they had lived, where she had kissed her husband goodbye 3 years earlier. The building was gone, replaced by an empty lot full of trash and broken glass. A woman was sitting on the stoop of the building next door, an older white woman with hard eyes and a permanent scowl. Eleanor recognized her, Mrs. Jenkins, the neighbor who had always looked at them with disgust, who had called the police twice to complain about noise when there was no noise, who had once told Eleanor that she was a disgrace to her race. But Mrs. Jenkins was the only person left who might know what had happened to Victor and me. "Excuse me," Eleanor said, her heart pounding. "I'm looking for my husband and son, Victor Mitchell and his little boy. They used to live in that building. Do you know where they went?" Mrs. Jenkins looked at her for a long moment, recognition flickering in those cold eyes. Then her face twisted into something that might have been satisfaction. "You're the one who ran off to Europe, aren't you? Left your husband and baby behind to go make money. Please, I just need to know where they are. I've been trying to find them for 2 years." Mrs. Jenkins stood up slowly, brushing off her dress. "Well, you can stop looking. They're dead. Both of them died in a car accident about 3 years back. The funeral was small. Nobody came." The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, grabbing a lamppost to keep from falling. Dead. No, that's not possible. I would have been told. Someone would have contacted me. Who was going to contact you? You weren't here. You abandoned them, Mrs. Jenkins's voice was cold and satisfied. That little boy died crying for his mama, and his mama was across the ocean counting her money. Eleanor collapsed onto the sidewalk, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. Mrs. Jenkins watched her for a moment, then turned and walked back inside, closing the door behind her, without another word. Everything that followed, the ruthless business deals, the cold empire building, the marriage to a wealthy man she didn't love, the children she raised without warmth, it all started on that sidewalk in that moment when Eleanor believed she had lost everything that mattered. She didn't know that Mrs. Jenkins had lied. She didn't know that Victor had survived the accident, had spent years searching for her too, had eventually given up and remarried and never spoke of her again. She didn't know that her son was alive, that he had grown up poor and fatherless and believing that his mother had abandoned him without a second thought. 40 years of grief built on a single lie from a woman who hated the idea of a white woman loving a black man. And now, by some impossible twist of fate, that son was kneeling on a hospital floor in the next room, reading letters his mother had written to a ghost, learning the truth about a tragedy that could have been prevented by a single honest word. I gathered the letters and photographs carefully, placing them back into the wooden box with hands that had finally stopped shaking. The tears had dried on my face, leaving salt trails on my dark skin. But something had changed in my eyes. The confusion and grief were still there, but now they were joined by something else: resolve. I knew who I was now. I knew who Eleanor Harrington really was. And I knew that the two people who had tried to throw me out of this hospital, who had insulted my blood and my skin and my very existence, were not her real children at all. I was. I walked back to the recovery room where Lily was still sleeping, her small body curled up on the hospital bed, the old bracelet glinting on her wrist. I sat down beside her and watched her breathe. This perfect little girl who had no idea that her entire family history had just been rewritten. She had a grandmother, a living grandmother, and that grandmother was lying in the next room, kept alive by blood that connected us all. The door burst open without warning. Nathan Harrington stormed in first, his face pale and twisted with barely controlled panic. Brooke followed close behind, And this time there were 3 men in expensive suits accompanying them. Lawyers, the kind that charged $1,000 an hour and knew how to make problems disappear. But Nathan didn't look smug anymore. He looked scared. I understood immediately. They knew somehow. In the past hour they had found out the truth. Maybe they had bribed a nurse to show them the test results. Maybe they had overheard the doctors whispering about the impossible biological match. Maybe they had simply put the pieces together themselves. However they had learned it, the fear in their eyes told me everything I needed to know. They knew I was Eleanor's real son, and they were terrified of what that meant for their inheritance. "Mr. Mitchell," Nathan said, forcing his voice into something resembling calm, "we need to talk privately." "Talk about what?" Nathan glanced at Lily sleeping on the bed, then back at me. "About the future. Your future and ours." One of the lawyers stepped forward, carrying a leather folder. He opened it and pulled out a check, placing it on the small table beside the bed. $500,000. The exact amount that had been promised for the blood donation. They were prepared to honor the reward immediately. In fact, they were prepared to be extremely generous, but there were conditions. Brooke moved closer, her voice low and urgent. They knew who I was. They knew what those test results showed. And they knew what their mother would do if she woke up and found out I was alive. She'd change everything. The will, the trust, the entire estate. She'd hand it all over to me, the son she'd been mourning for 40 years, and they would be left with nothing. I looked at the check on the table but didn't touch it. "So, you want to buy my silence?" "We want to make a deal." Nathan pulled out another document from the folder. I would take the money, sign this agreement stating that I would never contact their mother, never reveal my identity to her or to the press, and never make any claim on the Harrington estate. In return, I would walk away with $500,000 free and clear. The lawyer added that it was a generous offer, more than generous considering my current financial situation. They were aware of my debts, my daughter's tuition problems, everything. This money would solve all of that. I stood up slowly, my eyes moving from the check to Nathan to Brooke to the lawyers. They were all watching me with a mixture of hope and fear, like gamblers waiting to see if their final bet would pay off. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," I said, my voice quiet. "You want me to take this money and disappear? You want me to let my mother die without ever knowing that her son is alive? You want me to abandon her the same way she thinks she abandoned me 40 years ago?" "It's not abandonment," Brooke said quickly. "It's just business. Mother doesn't need the emotional trauma of learning the truth at her age. It would be cruel to tell her. We're actually protecting her." I started to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that made the lawyer shift uncomfortably and take a step backward. Nathan's face went even paler. "Protecting her," I repeated. "That's what you call it? The same way you were protecting her when you sat in her hospital room arguing about how to divide up her money while she was dying? The same way you protected her by trying to stop the only blood transfusion that could save her life?" I picked up the check and looked at it for a long moment. $500,000. Enough to pay off all my debts, secure Lily's education, maybe even buy a small house somewhere. Enough to change my entire life. Then I tore it in half. Nathan made a strangled sound. "What are you doing?" I tore the halves into quarters, then eighths, letting the pieces flutter to the floor like confetti. "I'm not for sale. My mother is not for sale, and the truth is definitely not for sale." "You're making a mistake," Brooke hissed. "A very expensive mistake. We will destroy you. We have lawyers, connections, resources you can't even imagine. We will make your life a living hell." I walked past her without a word. I walked past Nathan, past the lawyers, past all of them, heading straight for the door that led to Eleanor's room. "Stop him!" Nathan shouted. One of the lawyers grabbed my arm, trying to hold me back. I turned and looked at the man with an expression that made him let go immediately. "Touch me again," I said quietly, "and it won't be the lawyers you'll need. It'll be the doctors." I pushed open the door and walked into Eleanor's room. She was still unconscious, still hooked up to machines, still fighting for her life with blood that had come from a son she thought was dead. I walked to her bedside and looked down at her face, seeing it differently now, seeing my mother. I reached down and took her hand in mine. Behind me, Nathan and Brooke burst into the room, but they stopped just inside the doorway, frozen by the sight of this man standing at their mother's bedside holding her hand like he had every right to be there, because he did. "Get away from her," Brooke said, her voice shaking. "You don't belong here. You don't belong anywhere near her." I didn't turn around. I just kept looking at my mother's face. I've spent 40 years not belonging anywhere, growing up without a mother, believing I wasn't good enough for her to stay. Do you know what that does to a child? Do you have any idea? "We don't care about your tragic backstory," Nathan snapped. "This is about family. Our family." Now I turned. I looked at Nathan and Brooke in their expensive clothes and their perfect hair, and their faces twisted with greed and fear. "Your family," I repeated. "Let me tell you something about family. Family doesn't sit in a hospital room calculating how much money they'll inherit when someone dies. Family doesn't try to stop a blood transfusion because they don't like the color of the donor's skin. Family doesn't offer bribes to make the truth disappear." I pointed to the door. "You want to know the difference between us? I came here to save a stranger's life because I needed money for my daughter's education. I didn't know who Eleanor Harrington was. I didn't want anything from her except the reward that was offered. But you, both of you, you've had her your entire lives, and all you can think about is what you'll get when she's gone." Brooke's face contorted with rage. "How dare you lecture us? You're nothing. Just some poor black delivery driver who got lucky with his blood type. You think sharing DNA with our mother makes you part of this family. You'll never be one of us. You'll never belong in our world." I smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "The blood you despise," I said slowly, "the blood you tried so hard to keep out of your mother's body, is the only thing keeping her alive right now. Your blood couldn't save her. Your brother's blood couldn't save her. All your money and your connections and your expensive lawyers couldn't save her. But my blood could. The blood of a poor black delivery driver from the Bronx." I let that sink in for a moment. "So you can stand there and tell me I don't belong. You can threaten me with your lawyers and your money, but every breath your mother takes, every beat of her heart, is because of me. And when she wakes up, she's going to know the truth. All of it, including what her real children were doing while she was fighting for her life." The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Nathan and Brooke stood frozen in the doorway, their faces masks of impotent fury. The lawyers had already retreated into the hallway, wanting no part of this confrontation. I turned back to my mother's bed and sat down in the chair beside it, still holding her hand. "I'm not going anywhere," I said without looking at them. "I'll be right here when she wakes up, and you can either accept that or you can leave. But I'm done listening to anything you have to say." Hours passed in that hospital room. Nathan and Brooke eventually retreated to the hallway, whispering furiously with their lawyers about legal strategies and damage control. But I stayed exactly where I was, sitting in the chair beside my mother's bed, holding her hand, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. Lily had woken up and joined me, sitting quietly on my lap, not fully understanding what was happening but sensing that something important had changed. She kept looking at the old woman on the bed, then back at my face, trying to piece together a puzzle she didn't have all the pieces for yet. "Daddy, who is she?" Lily whispered. I stroked my daughter's hair and thought about how to answer. "She's someone I've been looking for my whole life, baby. I just didn't know it until today." The heart monitor beeped steadily. The ventilator hummed. The Manhattan skyline glittered with a million lights, indifferent to the drama unfolding in this small room. It was just past midnight when Eleanor Harrington opened her eyes. At first, she didn't move. Her eyes simply opened, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of where she was and what had happened. The last thing she remembered was a sharp pain in her chest, then falling, then nothing but darkness. She turned her head slowly, expecting to see a nurse, a doctor, perhaps one of her children if they had bothered to come. Instead, she saw me, a black man in a worn delivery jacket, sitting beside her bed, holding her hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. And on my lap, a little girl with dark skin and bright eyes wearing a silver bracelet that caught the light. Eleanor blinked, certain she was still dreaming. Or perhaps she had died and this was some kind of afterlife, a place where the ghosts of the past came to greet you. Who? Her voice came out as a croak, dry from days of disuse. Who are you? I leaned forward and Eleanor saw my face clearly for the first time. The shape of my jaw, the curve of my cheekbones, the way my eyebrows drew together when I was thinking. She had seen that face before 1,000 times in photographs, in dreams, in the mirror of another man's eyes. "My name is Ryan Mitchell," I said softly. "My father was Victor Mitchell, and 40 years ago you left me with him in a small apartment in the Bronx while you went to Europe to save our family from starvation." Eleanor's heart monitor began to beep faster. Her hand trembled in my grip, her fingers tightening around mine like a drowning woman grasping for a lifeline. "That's not possible," she whispered. "You're dead. They told me you were dead, both of you. The accident. We survived the accident." I reached into my pocket and pulled out Lily's bracelet, the one I had given her years ago, the one I had told her came from her grandmother. I placed it in Eleanor's palm. "Do you recognize this?" Eleanor stared at the bracelet. It was tarnished and worn, the silver darkened with age, but she would have known it anywhere. She had bought it at a market in the Bronx in 1983, a cheap little thing that cost less than $5, but Victor had fastened it around her wrist and told her it was more beautiful than any diamond. She had given it to me on my 2nd birthday, just before she left for Europe. A piece of herself to keep with me until she returned. "This is impossible," Eleanor breathed, but her hands were shaking so badly now that she could barely hold the bracelet. "I looked for you. I came back. Mrs. Jenkins said you were dead. She said you died in the accident, that nobody came to the funeral, that I was too late." Mrs. Jenkins lied. My voice was gentle but firm. She hated that my father married a white woman. "So, when you came looking for us, she told you we were dead, and you believed her, and we spent 40 years thinking you had abandoned us." Tears were streaming down Eleanor's face now, carving rivers through the wrinkles and the hospital pallor. She reached up with a trembling hand and touched my cheek, her fingers tracing the lines of my face like a blind woman trying to read Braille. "Your eyes," she whispered, her voice breaking on the words. "Your eyes are exactly like Victor's, exactly the same." And then she was sobbing. Great, heaving sobs that shook her entire body and made the machines beep in alarm. She pulled me toward her with a strength that seemed impossible for someone who had been dying just hours ago, wrapping her thin arms around me and holding on like she would never let go. "My baby," she cried into my shoulder. "My beautiful baby boy. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I never stopped loving you. I never stopped looking for you. I never stopped." I held my mother for the first time in 40 years, feeling her tears soak through my jacket, feeling the fragile bones of her body press against my chest. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times as a child, dreamed of my mother coming back for me, explaining why she had left, telling me that she loved me and had never wanted to go. Now it was real, and I didn't know what to feel. The anger was still there, buried deep beneath the surface. But so was the love. The love of a 4-year-old boy who had never stopped missing his mother no matter how hard he had tried to pretend otherwise. The door burst open. Nathan and Brooke rushed in, their faces masks of panic when they saw Eleanor awake and embracing me. "Mother!" Nathan reached for her arm, trying to pull her away from me. "You don't understand what's happening. This man is trying to manipulate you. He's after your money. He showed up out of nowhere with some ridiculous story." Brooke added, her voice high and desperate. "He's not your son. He can't be." "This is some kind of scam." Eleanor released me and turned to face her other children. Her eyes, still wet with tears, had gone cold as ice. "Get out!" Nathan blinked. "Mother, you need to listen to us. You're not thinking clearly. The medication, the trauma, you're not in any state to make decisions." "I said, get out." Eleanor's voice was stronger now, filled with a fury that made both Nathan and Brooke take a step backward. "I have spent the last 40 years surrounded by people who only cared about my money. I have watched you fight over my inheritance while I was still breathing. I have listened to you plot and scheme and calculate how much you would get when I died." She pointed at the door, her hand steady despite her weakness. "This is my son, my real son, the only child I have ever had who carries my blood in his veins, the only one who came to save my life without knowing who I was or what he would get in return." Her voice cracked with emotion. "He is the only child I have who has a heart. Now get out of my room before I call security and have you removed from this hospital permanently." Nathan's face went purple with rage. "You can't do this. We have rights. We're your legal children. You are the children of a man I married to forget my grief. You are strangers who share my house but have never shared my heart." Eleanor lay back against her pillows, exhausted but resolute. "Leave now and don't come back until I send for you." The siblings stood frozen for a moment, unable to believe what was happening. Then Brooke grabbed Nathan's arm and pulled him toward the door, hissing something about lawyers and conservatorship hearings. The door slammed behind them. In the silence that followed, I felt a small hand tugging at my jacket. Lily had climbed down from the chair and was standing beside the bed, looking up at the old woman with curious eyes. "Daddy, is this the sick lady you helped?" I lifted Lily onto the edge of the bed so Eleanor could see her clearly. "Mom, this is Lily, my daughter, your granddaughter." Eleanor stared at the little girl, at her dark skin and bright eyes and the intelligence that shone in her face. She saw Victor in the shape of her smile. She saw me in the way she held herself, straight-backed and proud. And she saw herself in the determination that sparkled in those young eyes. "Hello, Lily," Eleanor whispered, reaching out to touch the girl's cheek. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." Lily smiled, shy but pleased. "Daddy says you're my grandma. Is that true?" Eleanor looked at me, then back at Lily, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. But these were different tears, not tears of grief or guilt or regret. Tears of joy. "Yes, sweetheart," she said, pulling the little girl into a gentle hug. "I'm your grandma, and I have waited my whole life to meet you." 3 weeks after that night in the hospital, the news spread through every gossip column and business magazine in the country. Eleanor Harrington had changed her will. Nathan and Brooke, the 2 stepchildren who had spent 40 years waiting for their inheritance, received nothing but a monthly stipend of $5,000 each, enough to survive but nowhere near the billions they had expected. The rest of the estate went to charitable foundations with not a single dollar directed toward the son Eleanor had just rediscovered. I had made sure of that. When Eleanor first offered to put me in the will, to give me everything she had spent 40 years building, I refused without hesitation. I didn't want her money. I had never wanted her money. What I wanted couldn't be bought with billions of dollars or written into legal documents. I wanted time, and time was something that had to be earned, not inherited. 2 days after the will was finalized, I walked into the financial office at Hudson Academy, the same office that had sent me the email threatening to expel Lily if I didn't pay within 24 hours. The same office that had nearly destroyed my daughter's future. I placed a check on the desk. $8,400, the exact amount I owed. The financial officer stared at the check, then at me in my worn delivery jacket. "Mr. Mitchell, this covers everything. The full outstanding balance." "I know." I pulled out a second check and placed it beside the first. "And this covers next year's tuition. I don't want any more emails about my daughter's enrollment." The money came from the blood donation reward. $500,000 deposited into my account the day after Eleanor woke up. I had considered refusing it, but then I realized something important. That money wasn't charity. It wasn't guilt. It was payment for a service I had provided, a fair exchange that I had earned with my own blood. I used it to pay off every debt I owed. The electric bill, the rent, the phone bill. Every red-stamped envelope on my kitchen counter disappeared, replaced by receipts marked paid in full. For the first time in years, I could walk to my mailbox without feeling my stomach clench with anxiety. But I didn't quit my jobs. I still delivered packages during the day and worked security at night, not because I needed the money anymore, but because those jobs were part of who I was. I had built my life on hard work, and I wasn't about to abandon that just because my circumstances had changed. One evening my phone rang. It was Eleanor. "Ryan, I've been thinking." Her voice was hesitant, almost shy. "I've prepared a room here at the estate for Lily. It has everything a little girl could want: a canopy bed, a view of the gardens, a closet full of new clothes. She could stay on weekends, spend time with her grandmother." I leaned against my kitchen counter, looking out the window at the Bronx skyline. Somewhere out there, beyond the broken streetlights and the graffiti-covered walls, my mother was sitting in a mansion worth more than this entire neighborhood. "I appreciate the offer," I said slowly, "but I have to say no." "Why?" Eleanor's voice cracked slightly. "I just want to give her everything she deserves. Everything I couldn't give you. That's exactly the problem." I chose my words carefully. Lily doesn't need canopy beds or closets full of clothes. She needs to know that her father worked hard to take care of her. She needs to learn that good things come from effort, not from someone else's guilt. I paused, letting the words settle. Lily needs to grow up on my hard work, not on your regret. I hope you can understand that. The line was silent for a long moment. When Eleanor spoke again, her voice was thick with tears. "You're a good father, Ryan. Better than I ever was a mother. You did what you thought was right. We both have to live with the choices we made." I straightened up and grabbed my jacket from the back of a chair. "But I'm not cutting you off. I just need us to take this slow." The next Sunday, I put on the best clothes I owned: a clean button-down shirt, pants without holes, shoes I had polished the night before. I helped Lily into her nicest dress and drove my old van across the bridge into Connecticut. The Harrington estate looked like something from a movie. Iron gates, a long driveway lined with trees, a mansion that seemed to go on forever in every direction. I parked my battered van between a Rolls-Royce and a Mercedes, and I didn't feel an ounce of shame. Lily ran up the marble steps and threw herself into Eleanor's arms. "Grandma, I brought you a picture I drew at school." Eleanor held her granddaughter tight, tears streaming down her face. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. I'm going to hang it in my bedroom where I can see it every day." I stood back, watching the two of them together. When Eleanor looked up at me, her eyes full of hope and questions, I gave her a small nod. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Mrs. Harrington," I replied. The name sat between us like a wall. Not Mom, not Mother, just Mrs. Harrington, the formal address of a polite stranger. Eleanor's smile flickered, but she didn't push. She understood. Trust had to be rebuilt, one brick at a time. We spent the afternoon together. Lily showed her grandmother every corner of the estate, dragging her from room to room while chattering about school and friends and the new math problem she was learning. Eleanor listened to every word like it was the most important thing she had ever heard. I watched from a distance, joining them for lunch but saying little. When Lily asked why her daddy was so quiet, I just smiled and told her that sometimes grown-ups needed time to figure out their feelings. As the sun began to set, I helped Lily into the van and buckled her seatbelt. Eleanor had wheeled herself to the front door, watching us prepare to leave. "Same time next week?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual but failing. I looked at her for a long moment. This old woman in her wheelchair, surrounded by billions of dollars worth of property, but desperate for something that money could never buy. "Same time next week," I said. I got into the van and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I watched Eleanor raise her hand in farewell, her face sad but smiling. She understood what I was doing, and she respected me for it. The van pulled through the iron gates and turned onto the road back to the Bronx. 2 weeks later, I was kneeling in front of my apartment door, screwdriver in hand, finally fixing the broken lock that had been bothering me for months. Lily was inside doing her homework, humming a song she had learned at school. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I wiped my hands on my jeans and pulled it out. A text message from a number I had recently saved in my contacts. "Mom bought Lily the painting set she's been wanting. Come pick it up next time you visit." I stared at the screen. Mom, she had signed it Mom. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the evening sky. The same sky that covered the Bronx and Connecticut. that stretched over tiny apartments and sprawling mansions without caring about the difference. 40 years of pain couldn't be erased with a few Sunday visits. 40 years of believing I had been abandoned couldn't be healed by a text message signed, Mom. But somewhere between that hospital room and this moment, something had shifted. We were trying, both of us, one small step at a time. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. I looked up at the sky one more time, then put my phone back in my pocket and returned to fixing the door. I needed time, and for the first time in 40 years, I had it. We had begun, and for now, that was enough. And so this story comes to an end. But the lessons it carries will stay with us long after the final words fade. I spent 40 years believing my mother had abandoned me. Eleanor spent 40 years mourning a son she thought was dead. Yet, a single act of kindness given without expectation brought us back together. Well, this is what life teaches us. The help we offer without asking for anything in return might be the very thing that saves us. We are all connected by invisible threads that only reveal themselves in moments of grace. Never underestimate the power of showing up for another human being. You might just be saving someone who has been waiting their whole life to be found. If this story touched your heart, please like and share it with someone who needs hope today. Subscribe and leave a comment below. Has an unexpected act of kindness ever changed your life? I never thought giving blood to a stranger would rewrite my entire life, but that rainy afternoon in Manhattan changed everything for me and my little girl Lily. I walked into that gleaming hospital as a broke delivery driver from the Bronx, just trying to scrape together her tuition so she wouldn't lose the one good thing in her world. What I found instead was my own mother, Eleanor Harrington, the billionaire I'd spent 40 years believing had thrown me away. In that moment, with her cold, entitled kids sneering at my skin and my worn-out boots, I learned the deepest truth life ever handed me. The kindest thing you can ever do isn't about money or status. It's showing up for someone when they need you most, without expecting a single thing in return. That simple act of compassion cracked open 40 years of heartbreak, lies, and loneliness. It taught me that real family isn't the one written in wills or sealed by blood tests. It's forged in quiet forgiveness, in choosing love over resentment, and in realizing that every broken heart still beats with the same desperate hope for a second chance. Eleanor and I didn't get a fairy tale ending, but we got something better. We got time, slow Sunday visits, and the chance to build something honest from the ruins. And Lily, she got a grandma who looks at her like she's the whole world. If there's one thing I want you to carry with you today, it's this. Never underestimate what your smallest kindness might unlock in someone else's story. You could be the answer they've been praying for. If this story hit you right in the heart like it did mine, drop a comment below and tell me, has an unexpected act of kindness ever changed your life? Hit that like button, share it with someone who needs hope right now, and subscribe so you never miss the stories that remind us we're all just one generous moment away from healing. I'll see you in the next one.